Bienvenidos todos. Welcome. Welcome to the California's Reproductive Justice Future, Moving Money and Building Power briefing. Today we examine what comes next in California as we continue to chart a path towards reproductive justice together. My name is Obiekea. I'm the Chief Strategist with the Women's Foundation of California, and I use she, her, and ella pronouns. Please introduce yourselves on the chat. This is an opportunity to be in community. Before I start, I want to take a moment to extend a very special thanks to all of our co-hosts. We will begin with a land acknowledgement. Though this is a digital space and we are in different locations, it's important to take a moment to acknowledge that we're on unceded land of Native peoples, whose lands and culture was forcibly taken. The creation of the United States that we live in was founded upon the exclusion and erasure of its first peoples. Today, I honor them by naming them, thanking the ancestors for this land, for nurturing and caring for it so that we could be here today. I invite you to take a moment to thank the land that you are on and those that cared for it and built it to be what it is today, Native and enslaved African people. I am on Ohlone territory and I give thanks to the various tribes on this land. I also give thanks to the Tupi-Guarani, who are the first peoples of São Paulo, where I'm from. May we honor their legacy by moving collectively towards an equitable world that lives in right relationship with its land and within community. For those of us who aren't Native, I encourage us to think about how we can commit to solidarity and be accomplices in returning the land back and supporting the demands of Native tribes and communities. Acknowledging the land we're settlers on is just one very small act of recognition to be built upon. It is now my honor to introduce you to my colleague, Marisol Franco, Chief Strategist for Programs for the Women's Foundation of California, who is co-moderating today's session.
Thank you, Bia. Hello, everyone. Marisol Franco, pronouns she, her, ella. I've adopted that. And I'm coming in from Tongva Land in Los Angeles. Today, I want to talk about why California is in a ready stance. We're going to hear from wonderful speakers and leaders in the movement, talk about the different contributing factors and the work ahead. But before we go there, want to acknowledge that one of the reasons that we are in the ready stance in California is also because of the work that communities have done to elect leaders who truly represent the needs of our communities. We have a governor and legislature who have made it their responsibility to be champions for reproductive freedom in this moment. And we know we cannot take that for granted. It wasn't that long ago that we had a governor who decimated the safety net during the 2008 Great Recession, when Black, Indigenous, people of color, low income, and immigrant communities were already hardest hit. So we are thrilled to share a message from our governor that is a champion in this moment.
Hey everybody, it's Governor Gavin Newsom here, and it goes without saying, this is a pretty dark moment in American history. The rights all of you have championed, worked so hard for, fought so hard for, have been taken away in real time, and here we are. Here we are in a post-Roe world. We've already seen with these trigger laws, just like that, rights stripped back, instituting backwards draconian measures to outlaw the right to choose. But here in California, our state, we're not going to let that happen. You have played a critical role for decades in advancing the cause of reproductive rights and reproductive freedom. Women's Foundation California and so many of the organizations gathered here today were not only part of those moments in the past, but you're made for the moments, this moment, today, and the moments here in the future. Together we will continue to expand critical abortion care services for those living in California, but also those living elsewhere. You know, I had the privilege on the day of the Supreme Court decision that struck down Roe to sign legislation that many of you worked so hard to get to my desk that makes California a safe haven for women all across this country. We will not, this is declarative, we will not cooperate with any states that attempt to prosecute women or doctors for receiving or providing reproductive care in California. You know, in this year's budget as well, something else, thank you for your strong advocacy and leadership. I have the privilege of working with the legislature where we'll invest close to $250 million, over $200 million just this year alone of incremental support to advance reproductive care and to help cover the costs, continue to help cover the costs of abortion services for those that don't have health insurance. Also ramp up our outreach efforts to make sure all Californians know what their rights are, and of course, a lot more that's part of that package. This investment, these dollars, these investments are not the end. I recognize they're just further starting point, well, further efforts to advance the work we know we need to do, particularly now in a post-Roe world, to protect the rights for those to choose. You know, California has the opportunity as well, and this is remarkable, and I'm so proud of the legislative leadership, Senator Pro Tem Atkins and so many others. We worked closely to get this state constitutional amendment to enshrine, to codify the right to abortion on the ballot this November. And so we have something to be for, something that we can lean into over the course of the next few months. Just an example of where California wants to do more, where California needs to do more to continue to inspire not just all of us living in this state, but inspire others living outside of this state to know that we have their back. So together, we're going to ensure that California remains a safe haven for everyone and a guiding light for the rest of the nation. Thank you for being along with all of us, part of that journey. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, as I said, for being ready to meet this moment. And thank you for keeping up the good fight.
It is both a relief and also a responsibility to know that we have a champion. Responsibility because we can do more as we know we need, and we have partners who are willing to walk along with us. So now I would like to jump in and introduce our speakers. So California has a very unique landscape, has a reproductive freedom state. Despite having our own issues, we are poised as a reproductive freedom state due to a lot of factors. And that also includes a very robust coalition that has been strengthening relationships across the reproductive health, rights, and justice field for the last 25 plus years, and intentionally centering the reproductive justice framework to follow the lead of BIPOC leaders. Today, we have the director of the California Coalition for Reproductive Freedom as our co-moderator. Welcome, Nakia Woods. Her pronouns are they, them. We also have 3 leaders from organizations at the forefront of the reproductive justice movement, both in California and nationally. We have Jessica Pinckney, pronouns she, her, with ACCESS Reproductive Justice, a reproductive justice organization funding abortion and other reproductive health care. She previously served as the Vice President of Government Affairs at In Our Own Voice, and her bio will be dropped in the chat as well as all the other speakers. In addition, we have Laura Jiménez, pronouns she, her, ella. She is the Executive Director of California Latinas for Reproductive Justice. Laura has also worked with women of color organizations across the country on issues of reproductive justice for more than 2 decades. And finally, we also have Onyemma Obiekea. Pronouns are she, her. She is a policy analyst for Black Women for Wellness, and she is also holding down the fort at Black Women for Wellness Action Project, one of a few reproductive justice C4 organizations. Onyemma currently works on behalf of both Black Women for Wellness and Black Women for Wellness Action Project to advance intersectional transformative legislation that seeks to secure the health and well-being of Black women and girls throughout California. Thank you all for being here. And I will pass it to Nakia to start us off in this conversation.
And we did have a question in the chat around closed captioning. I do not have the answer to that question, but I did want to highlight it. So if someone can answer in the chat first, that would be great. Hi, everyone. So just really quickly, I know most of y'all are here thinking about, well, why should we be investing in California? We are a reproductive freedom state already. And the harsh reality is actually, I feel comfortable saying that all of our organizations that are on this call right now and many smaller grassroots organizations have been operating at a deficit already, because of the idea that California is a reproductive freedom state. That doesn't mean that all Californians have access, and that doesn't mean that all of our organizations are well funded. So, with the fall of Roe v. Wade, we're really thinking about the influx of not only folks that are going to be coming to California to receive critical abortion services, but also thinking about the amount of folks that are going to be reaching out to our organizations looking for solutions. They see, again, a lot of us are at the forefront of the reproductive freedom world, and so people are looking at us. And so figuring out how do we invest in California while also making sure that our other siblings across the country are not left on the wayside. And folks have been saying this a lot. It's not my catchphrase, but I think it's a great one. Do not quote me on this. But fund us like you want us to win. That does not mean that we're going to start divesting from California now, recognizing how much of a force we are, especially in the reproductive justice movement. So with that, I actually want to start us off with our first question to Jessica. So what does the SCOTUS decision mean for California? What are the current and anticipated impacts?
Thanks, Nakia, and good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here with you. As was mentioned, my name is Jessica Pinckney. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm joining you today from Ohlone Land, also known as East Oakland. In terms of what the SCOTUS decision means for California, what it means is that we're already seeing a rather significant influx in the number of people who are traveling to California from states who have either already banned abortion or are hostile to abortion and abortion access. And I think it's really important to name that this isn't something that started on June 24th, once the Supreme Court decision came down. In 2020, ACCESS Reproductive Justice supported folks in California, as well as 9 other states throughout the year in accessing reproductive health care here in the state. And in 2021, that number doubled to 18. So we supported folks in 18 different states. Yes, of course, Nevada, Arizona, folks close to us, but also folks in Vermont, in Massachusetts, in Maine. And so we know that the Supreme Court decision only exacerbates an issue that was already a significant issue for many people across the country, and that's the ability to access abortion care in their community, in their state. We, of course, after SB 8 was enacted in Texas last fall, saw a significant increase in Texans coming to California to access abortion care. And that, of course, is very much reflective of what we anticipate to continue to happen now that Roe has been overturned. In terms of current impacts, I think it's a little hard to say this soon exactly what we're going to be facing. Just dropped in the chat is the Guttmacher Institute's interactive map, which was released prior to the Supreme Court decision, which very explicitly names that California should anticipate an up to 3,000% increase in the number of people of reproductive age whose nearest clinic would become a California clinic if Roe was overturned. So I think it's important to clarify a little bit here. That's not a 3,000% increase in people who are going to need abortions tomorrow. It's people of reproductive age whose nearest clinic is now in California. If you look at that map, you'll see that it is mostly Arizonans. And we have, in fact, seen an increase in folks coming from Arizona leading up to the Supreme Court decision and since the Supreme Court decision. But what we also know as California's statewide standalone abortion fund is that folks' travel patterns don't also just relate to proximity, right? We know that people travel from further states because they have a friend or a family member in California who they can rely on for emotional support or practical support. It may be that the clinic that they called in their hometown or city has a relationship with a clinic in California and directed them to us. It may be that the cheapest airfare is Houston to Los Angeles, not Houston to Albuquerque, right? Like there's many things that go in to people's travel patterns. And so it is still a little difficult to anticipate exactly what it is that we will see as the impact, but we know our helpline has been flooded with calls since the decision. And we are in our history, our callers have been about 50 to 70% Californians and about 30% out of state folks. And we're already seeing more of a 50-50 split in this moment and can only anticipate that will increase. Also, if you look at our number of callers from January to June of 2021 compared to January through June of 2022, we've had a doubling of callers every month, even before the Supreme Court decision came down. So while we supported over 500 callers in 2021, we anticipate that pre the fall of Roe, we would have supported at least 1,000 callers this year. And now with the fall of Roe and up to 26 states banning or severely limiting abortion access, we anticipate that we will support close to 2,000. But again, the impacts are being felt in this very moment, and we're just trying to assess as best we can and adapt to the needs of our callers and the rapidly changing caller population as everyone kind of navigates what is a little bit of chaos in this moment. So many states are trying to figure out what laws are on the books, what aren't, what's legal, what's not. And so, we're just trying to be a solid sounding board for our callers, as well as our abortion fund siblings all across the country as we navigate this dynamic.
Thank you, Jessica. And I really want to I really want to thank you for uplifting the fact that numbers and services have already increased prior to the decision. I think that just highlights how critical this work is at this time. And yeah, giving us all that amazing background information and really understand, give us a viewpoint into what this post-Roe world is looking like. So our next question we have for Laura. So how do you feel that the reproductive justice framework meets this moment?
That's a great question. For those of us doing reproductive justice work and for folks that may not be familiar with the differences between the frameworks, reproductive health, rights, and justice. So, briefly, the reproductive justice framework fights equally for bodily autonomy, the right to not have children and to have access to reproductive and sexual health services such as contraception, abortion, sex ed. It also fights for the right to have children and making sure that there's not state intervention or systemic intervention in our abilities to reproduce should we want to do so, and giving us the rights to choose the environment and the people that would be present and support labor and delivery. As well as the right to parent the children that we have. And so I think reproductive justice being a framework that utilizes intersectionality as a major core pillar of the work means that we have to consider a lot of things all at once. It means that we're not just talking about the ability to get an abortion, the legal part of it. Because I think what we advocates, activists, people that have been doing this on the front line for some time, and again, I think, you know, all the respect and admiration to folks that have been doing this for many years to get us this far. But what we know is that legal access doesn't mean practical access. So depending on who you are and where you are in the state of California, you may have quite a difficult time accessing services, even though there's lots of legal right to it here in California. So if you're a young person, if you're a person without health insurance, if your language that you speak is not English or one of the threshold languages that the state recognizes, if you're a poor person who's living in a remote area and might need lots of transportation. So it gives us a way of looking at each, you know, thinking about how many different people might need to access lots of different services and resources to be able to get an abortion safely. I think the other way that it is a really wonderful tool right now is that it gives us a way to connect to the rest of the you know, I'm just going to say it, the fuckery that's happening that the Supreme Court has put forth in this session and that we've seen for some time. So we cannot disconnect this from the lack of action, the inaction on gun violence, the inaction on police brutality, specifically on Black bodies, the ways that immigration law, you know, creates the conditions for dozens of people to die in a trailer in Texas. The ways that the Supreme Court has actually, well, one particular justice has actually said they want to come after queer, trans folks as soon as possible. So it provides us that lens to be able to look at it, because we need to really be focused on not just, you know, what can I do with my body, but how is the system, the government that we live under, how does it perpetuate ways of controlling not only our individual bodies, but our families, our communities, right? Connecting it to voting rights is incredibly important right here in the way that they're trying to do away with the rights. Again, I would say particularly, I feel like seeing it particularly in Black communities where they have such a strong voting history and you know, reputation for voting faithfully. It is very problematic, and it allows us to look at all of these things together instead of just, you know, focusing on abortion. You know, right now abortion is in the front seat, but you know, they don't take long. In 3 weeks, you know, someone else can be in the front seat. And so, you know, our question is like, how do we all? I think that we are in a moment where, you know, in cross movement ways, there is some reaching out to each other. I know we've gotten a lot of reach out, particularly from organizations doing intimate partner violence work, asking about how they can line up with our messaging. And I'm sure some of the rest of you have had your partners. I was really pleased to see some immigrant rights organizations like Chirla, who made a statement on the decision, and that's somewhat new, and it's hopeful to see that we are all sort of in that place together. And that's where I would say is how that meets this moment.
Thank you, and I really appreciate again, like bringing up that intersectional point, right? It's not just abortion, and I want to say this. I'm going to pass it to Marisol. Not only women have abortions. Abortion is not a women's issue. That's why I'm wearing my Black Trans Lives Matter shirt. I know that it's really easy to say that abortion is for women, and no. we're not doing that in this space. And I will always be here as a champion and reminding folks it is not just women who we are talking about. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Marisol.
Thanks, Nakia. And thanks, Laura, for underscoring one, how intersectionality means that there's more of us to bring together for this fight and all our fights. And with that, I want to hear from Onyemma. But before then, actually, I just want to let folks know to, as you've been doing, to place your questions in the chat. We will get to them later on in the program. But please do put them in the chat. We are collecting them, and we'll get to as many as we can. So this next question is for you, Onyemma. Can you share with folks how California is moving forward, given you where you sit, what policy and organizing work is happening, and is still needed to advance reproductive justice in California?
Yeah, thank you so much, Marisol. Greetings, everyone. Onyemma Obiekea with Black Women for Wellness and Black Women for Wellness Action Project on Tongva land in AKA Los Angeles as well. Yeah, so how is California moving forward? I know it's a wonderful and fabulous thing to live in California, right? Like sometimes in some weird way we can breathe a sigh of relief, but I'm grateful for Laura in, in explaining, right, breaking down the differences in the frameworks between RJ and reproductive health and reproductive rights, because the reality of the fact of the matter is, right, while abortion is legal and we have pretty expansive rights on the books, the reality on the ground is that it's inequitable, right, for folks. And so if these rights aren't able to be realized by everyone in the state, if they're inaccessible, and if they're, if folks can't access them, then they're rights in name only for folks, right? And so we have to do the work to ensure that everybody is supported in their decision, is supported in determining their reproductive destinies. And so California, of course, has sprung into action and must be commended for the work that it's done, right? We've heard, from the governor around all of the wonderful things happening, right, through the budget investments in reproductive health care, built, building their reproductive infrastructure to live up to California's designation as a reproductive freedom state. A lot of that work has come out of the California Future of Abortion Council, which was comprised of 40 plus organizations, which ended up within a span of like 3 months, maybe less, developed a report with 45 recommendations. And out of those 45 recommendations came 15 pieces of legislation that have made their way through the legislature or are currently making their way through the legislature in this session, all seeking to expand and make equitable access to abortion care. And that goes from creating an uncompensated care fund for folks who aren't insured or who are coming in from other states to seek abortion care who won't qualify for health insurance, right, or Medi-Cal in California, right, ensuring that we're building long-term investments, like building a pipeline of providers such that, we have providers who are able to provide abortion care and other reproductive health care services that are actually culturally competent, that there's cultural concordance. So we're building a pipeline of providers of color. There are other bills that are in the works that are looking to expedite licensure of folks who make it or express that they will make it a priority to also provide access to abortion care to folks. So there are a lot of different bills that seek to address access to abortion through funding and practical support, through, building provider pipelines, ensuring that we can, we heard from Jessica about the influx of folks that we're already experiencing. Well, that means that we have to build an infrastructure of providers, right? Like we need folks to actually provide the care that folks will need, right? Such that, you know, folks who come in can have care, and those who are here in California where there's already a provider shortage can also have access to care and won't be displaced. So we're looking to build infrastructure in that way through a number of these bills. So I won't go through all 15 of them, right? But there's work that's being done at different levels. We're also looking to fund community-based organizations who we know are trusted messengers within the communities that they serve, right? To do outreach and education and reach the communities that they serve, you know, around the comprehensive reproductive and sexual health care that's available in California. You know, so that work is happening, right? Through the California Future of Abortion Council. You know, and I think what's important to note about the California Fab Council is that, you know, it was a body, you know, made up of a brain trust of reproductive justice, health and rights organizations, lawyers, researchers, justice advocates, and providers. And the first task and the first order of business was to really make an assessment of the gaps that are missing in California. And those 45 recommendations and centering equity in that assessment. And so like the recommendations, the 45 pieces of recommendations that came out of this really came from an assessment of what's missing in California already. So while we like to think of California as this beacon, which it is, right? We ahead, like we're not going to take that for granted. There are gaps that need to be addressed, such in order for access to be equitable. And so that's where we started from when we came up with these recommendations. You know, California is also advancing a constitutional amendment. So abortion will be on the ballot in November, you know, to explicitly, you know, enshrine access to abortion and contraception as fundamental rights in our state. So a lot of good stuff is happening, but when we think about like what policy and organizing work is needed to advance reproductive justice in California, again, I'm grateful for Laura for bringing up the RJ framework and explaining that so beautifully, right? You know, Laura mentioned, you know, we don't live single issue lives, right? We all live at intersections, and we must advance and implement policies that contemplates that, right? That contemplates the supports that are necessary for us to live whole and full lives. And that looks like a number of things, but that's work. It's work to develop those policies. It's work to advance those policies. It's work to have reproductive justice organizations inform the policies that are advanced, right? And oftentimes those are us that are underfunded, have low, you know, don't have the capacity to do that work, and that work must be funded because our voices must be at the table. Because another thing that's happening is the co-opting of reproductive justice and using that term and that framework as reproductive health rights or something or other, right? But not really taking into account what the framework calls for. So we need to be at those tables, and that needs to be funded. You know, Justice Clarence Thomas, again, as Laura mentioned, you know, he's great at saying the quiet thing out loud. And so we know it does not end with Dobbs or the overturn of Roe. He's coming for all of our rights. So we do need to engage in voting rights. You know, we need to look at, for me, you know, I work in the C4 realm, right? And so that also means we're doing the electoral work. We need to elect and hold accountable legislators, even in California, that will be champions for reproductive justice values, that will fight for reproductive justice values and legislation in the legislature. Not like what happened, and I'll share this story because this was a frustrating experience just last week. One of our bills was in the it was in the Senate Health Committee. And a Democratic senator was sitting on that committee and felt comfortable enough to abstain from a vote where, you know, a vote on a bill that was meant to decriminalize pregnancy loss, right? And pregnancy outcomes and abortions. So no, a Democratic senator where sitting on a committee where sorry, forgive me, I don't know if this is a C4 call, but I'm just going to share this, right? Like, two Republican senators made a scene, right? And used the opportunity to spread misinformation and disinformation about abortions, the impacts of abortions on our reproduction, all of this, right? And in that moment, a Democratic senator felt comfortable enough to not even take a vote when it came time to vote for this bill to pass. Sure, the bill passed, but when it comes to making a statement, you should not feel comfortable enough to abstain from a vote in that moment where there is opposition, and opposition has been emboldened to make crazy statements, right? And so we want to ensure that elected officials, our representatives, are in fact, progressive and champions for reproductive justice. So that C4 work, where funding is few and far between, also needs to be funded so that we can not only advance RJ legislation, but have legislators who can support and advance that work so that we can have long-term change. Crisis pregnancy centers are one example, I think, of policies. Like, we also need to figure out policies to really advance or address them, because they in fact are problematic and harmful to our communities in the way that they provide certain resources to communities, but also provide misinformation, disinformation that, around healthcare, reproductive and comprehensive sex healthcare that proves harmful. I'm going to step back, but there's clearly still work to be done in California, and there's so many ways that organization funders can support that work, such that reproductive justice can be actually implemented in our legislation and could be advanced in that way. Sorry for the mouthful, but Marisol, did that answer your question?
Yes, very thoroughly. And I just want to underscore, the work that your organizations have been doing with the Future of Abortion Council and the other 30+ organizations that came out with 45 recommendations in 3 months. And we know that it takes so many resources to push state policies, especially with such comprehensive reproductive justice oriented recommendations, that I really want to underscore something that you said in there, that about long-term investments, that this will require long-term investments, and both at the government level and also from our philanthropic community. Especially as we see, the opposition is emboldened even here. Thank you. Wanted to shift over to Laura, because with policy, hand in hand with policy, we know policy doesn't happen in a vacuum, but it happens connected to our values and the culture. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the cultural shift and cultural narrative work that is needed or is happening and needs more support in order to advance reproductive justice in California.
Yeah, I would I would be happy to. And I actually think that both Nakia and Onyemma shared some things that are really important around where we need to go with cultural shift work. And I know, like in our statements and our responses to what's been going on, we've been making sure that we're not, resting back on women's right to abortion, that we're talking about pregnant people who can become pregnant, people who need abortions. And I think it's an extremely important shift that needs to be made. And as pleased as we are that our governor is moving in the right direction here, I feel like we need to get the governor and our legislators on the same page of using the correct language, so that, because people need to understand that we're not just talking about women, that we're talking about anyone who might need an abortion of any gender, and that And I think that will sort of help us in making some strides, but also because again, from what I said earlier, people need to make the connections, between what we're talking about, the different issues that we're talking about here. So I think that's an area that I think some organizations have done really well at shifting language. Some are still working on it. So we want to encourage each other to also use that language nicely. But also, I think, in what Onyemma was talking about regarding the legislator who felt comfortable abstaining on that vote, I do think sometimes our culture shift work a lot, it's not only in our communities, which I can talk about in a moment, but a lot of times it's with our legislators and just having to talk to them about, this is why, this is how, these are the words you can use. Here's the talking points. This is the shift. This is the pivot that you need to make here, because we know we've already, we've talked about what these pivots are, right? I know, that particular legislator is in a very difficult district to be voting the right way, but it's now or never, right? It's now or never. Like, we can't, and her people are going to be the ones in the Central Valley that are going to have the most difficulty getting the services they need, with or without a constitutional amendment here. So giving her the language, giving her the support. So the cultural shift piece there is really important with our legislators, because we have had some great ones that are willing to just go out there and do it, and say all the things. And then we have some folks that are, fearful, or, I don't know, connected with the Catholic Church, lots of good stuff, but they do move. And I think, from our experience in getting some legislation passed around supporting young parents here in California, it took us several years to do that, because we first had to get somebody who was willing to, say that, who's willing to put their name on something saying that young parents needed support, instead of young parents are a burden to our society. And ultimately they were afraid to be asked, do you think it's okay for young people to be having sex and having children? So, like, this is not time for fear, right? This is not time for fear. Like, we need to just go with this. Who do you want left behind? Nobody? Then let's do this, right? So we need to shift the messages that we're giving. And so, all young parents are valuable. They are our future. We must support their sexual and reproductive health decisions so that they can make so they will have actual choices, not just one choice of how they want to move forward. And I think, the other thing I will say about culture shift work being needed is that in our communities, so many times it's needed. And for those of you that work with communities that tend to be influenced by religious communities heavily, this can definitely be a real struggle. But it is a conversation we need to have. And so sometimes the culture shift work is just about having the conversations versus not having them, and letting the media bias or the legislative bias or your church bias, come in and tell you sort of how things are, making sure that we're actually talking about the issues with facts and not propaganda is really important. And I think it's also just about, in this instance, it's about bringing it back to the individuals that they love in their lives, and how they might make decisions about a pregnancy, considering all of the different intersecting oppressions or experiences that they're having. Because I think once you bring it back to like that person that you love, there are maybe some very different answers around what people should be able to do. I think people tend to get stuck on their beliefs. We're not asking you to believe or not believe in abortion. It is a medical practice. We're asking you whether you think you get to decide over somebody else's body, what choices they can make. And so that is where I think that cultural shift work can be. Those are the many areas I think it can be useful.
Thank you, Laura. There's a lot of work ahead. And so now I want to ask directly, how you see philanthropy supporting and partnering to build the reproductive justice future that we need. And I'd love to start with Jessica.
Sure, thanks. I mean, I will say this, ACCESS Reproductive Justice is a 6-person organization. 2 of our staff are full-time Healthline staff. We have 1 volunteer engagement coordinator, someone who works on our policy advocacy work, and then someone who works on our ops and admin. So we're doing a lot of work in this moment and always with really significantly limited capacity. We are so lucky to be in partnership with other policy advocacy organizations, other abortion funding and practical support organizations, clinics. It truly does take a village. But I think it's really important in this moment to see philanthropy make long-term investments in infrastructure and operations for reproductive justice organizations. We are often lauded for doing our work on a shoestring budget and being small but mighty. And while that's something that I know many of us are proud of, it's also unsustainable, particularly in this moment. We've got a COVID pandemic, the fall of Roe, racial injustice all across the country, and a Supreme Court and a federal government who's really adamant to make sure that we are all taken down. And so we cannot do this on a shoestring budget. We cannot do this with limited staff capacity. And in most of our organizations, you know, it is Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, queer, LGBTQ+, immigrant individuals who are doing this work day in and day out. And so the toll that it takes on us as people with lived experience in the work that we're doing is really noticeable. And then I think the other thing I would say is we're small but mighty and limited capacity. So some of the requirements that are expected of us by philanthropy are incredibly burdensome. I wear 17 hats in my organization on any given day. And I would love to be able to dedicate hours on end to filling out a grant application or submitting a grant report. But if it's between that and providing support to my Healthline staff who are supporting callers who need abortions today, tomorrow, and yesterday, then that's going to be the priority, quite frankly. So I would say long-term investments in infrastructure and capacity, and I would say as few requirements as humanly possible, which is really just asking for trust in reproductive justice organizations and advocates who are skilled at doing this work and are really trying to be there for our communities day in and day out, which means a lot of other things get set to the side, as they should.
Thank you, Jessica. You hit on a lot of different things. I'll make sure we have enough time for questions, but so Onyemma and Laura, can you each take 1 minute to add on to Jessica's mic drop?
Yeah. I will just add, I mean, I'm going to just do like Jessica said, we're 12. I keep comparing our salaries to where they should be, and they're not at all where they should be. We're trying to raise those as much as we can, but I think, you know, for those of you in the philanthropic world that are, you know, I imagine you have pretty decent, thrivable wages. We do not. And I think that it's a lot to ask for people to be in this sort of, we're not working 24 hours a day, but the anxiety and the stress that has come up in the, you know, since the pandemic, but obviously it gets more intense than now or at some points than others. It's really important to highlight like that it's important for us to be able to do those things. I will just add to also what Jessica said. I think what's important for y'all to know, and for my funders, I know we've already talked about this many times, and I'll just thank all of our funders. You've done great in reducing those processes that to phone calls between friends. But I will say that what we have noticed in the last probably 8 years is that national funders seem to be moving a lot of funds to the South, to other regions where those laws are being made, which is important. But what I do see that has happened, and I think it may be a bit of complacency here in California around feeling like we're good, we have these proactive laws. Our larger California funders, we need there to be some more commitment to these issues. Because what is happening to California organizations, we find ourselves in that gap between national funders with the large money not funding our region and California funders not necessarily funding repro health rights or justice in a meaningful way. And so what I would say to you today is, if the wake-up call wasn't before, the wake-up call is now, because we can't sustain the work the way that we are working now. 6 people to run a hotline in California to provide information and practical support is just not enough. And we should not, and it's not fair of us to ask 6 people to do that for an extended period of time. We need help, and we need sustainable help to be able to grow and to be able to have those conversations we're being asked to have, to do that culture shift. We need more, and we need people to realize it's also an emergency here. Onyemma, go for it.
Thank you. So echoing everything Jessica and Laura said, just thinking about how you fund. Are you funding, as our executive director likes to say, funding us to win or to survive, which I think it encapsulates what everyone has said already, right? So are you funding reproductive justice organizations, multi-year funding, or funding us like 1 year at a time where, after, while doing the work, we're also seeking funding for the next year to keep our work. So what, like Laura said, is it sustainable funding? Again, reporting requirements, Jessica mentioned this, like, are they, think about what those requirements are and the burden that they place on us while we are, understaffed, underfunded, and trying to also do the work of a giant, right? Being intentional, right, around funding reproductive justice organizations, right? Like, just that, right? Or how are we funding actual reproductive justice organizations? And then I'll also plug funding C4 work. That's critical. That funding is few and far between, and that's critical work that I think needs to be funding. We need to do the political work that is necessary to advance the policy work. And so that I think is one more thing that I'd also add to that. And then general support funding, as opposed to like specifically like programmatic funding, because that can also be limiting as well in the work that we do, if that's helpful. So I'll step back just with that, because thank you, Laura, for your mic drop, and thank you, Jessica, for your mic drops as well. That's all I have to add.
All right. Given time, I think we'll, Nakia, any last thought or word before we go into Q&A?
Just really quick, just want to highlight, uplift, like, y'all have the money, and like I've said in the chat, right, like the expectation is for us to show up to the table, but to bring our own plate, our own food, and our own chairs. And like, that's just, it's not fair to us. CCRF, we have 2 staff people, and the expectation is for us to be everywhere, doing everything, applying to funding, doing your grant reports, giving you your numbers. How is that supposed to happen when there aren't staff? You can't expect the work to happen if you are not investing. It's unrealistic, and many times the people that are being burnt out, left on the road, are just like you. Who's on this panel? Women and femmes of color. And so, we continue and have continued to brunt the label. Like, we take it on and we do it. We shouldn't have to. We shouldn't have to without y'all's help. So, that's just a call out to folks, especially the folks that don't understand. Like, we are really doing this work with very little, with pennies, and we needed the money 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But we for sure need it right now.
Thanks, Nakia. I think that we need to do more to encourage and organize philanthropy. Given this is an intersectional fight, we need to see, like, California funders and funders that don't think RJ fits into the work, that they need to see that this is integral to the work. If you care and fund LGBTQ rights, racial justice, criminal justice reform, voting rights, then you need to fund RJ right now and for the long term. With that, we'll go into questions. And I know we have 5 minutes left in our time. So we probably won't get too many of them, but we do have them, and there are a few that are very much about practical support. And as a proud practical support volunteer for ACCESS Reproductive Justice, I can say that it's amazing to be able to do that. And there's a whole process, and I wonder, Jessica, we can send information afterwards via email, specifically talking about that.
Yeah, thank you. So I will say this, since the Supreme Court ruling dropped, we have had over 4,000 interest forms submitted for people who are interested to be practical support volunteers. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have one volunteer engagement coordinator. And we are a grassroots organization, so we build individual relationships with our volunteers. There is an application process, there's a vetting process, a training process, and then getting those volunteers integrated into our practical support system before folks can volunteer to drive people to appointments, to house people in their homes, to provide cash assistance to callers, etc. So we are so grateful in this moment for people's interest in volunteering. And we are actually about to pause our volunteer interest form for the time being because we're inundated. Honestly, people are calling our health line interested in volunteering. They're clogging up our ability to provide support to callers, which is our priority in this moment. And like I said, we have 4,000 interest forms, and right now we have about 200 volunteers total in our volunteer network. So I just really want to say ACCESS Reproductive Justice is so grateful for the support that we've seen from folks. And we're trying to get through the interest forms that people have submitted to date as quickly as possible, but it's not a quick process, nor are we going to make it a quick process because it puts the safety of our callers at risk. But I will drop our newsletter link to sign up for in the chat so that folks are made aware of when we are accepting volunteer interest again, and can get involved that way. And I strongly encourage, folks, that you can be having conversations with your friends, your family, your community members to do this culture shift work. That is incredibly valuable in this moment. You can make donations if that's a possibility for you. Even $1, $5 goes a long way for practical support and abortion funding organizations who are literally trying to get cash into the hands of our callers. So I'm sorry.
I have to ask you to. Thank you. I think a lot of the questions are, some were actually answered as we went through, but I wonder, there's a question around if there's a coalition of folks who are working on the C4 electoral issues. I'm assuming also because, again, abortion is on the ballot. It will be Proposition 1, I believe, in November.
Yeah,
Dr.
so
Onyemma, you can answer that.
Yes, so there are several coalitions in California or several tables that are working on, that come together, especially around like elections and discuss the various elections issues. So if you want, you can connect with me later. I can drop my email address here. If your question is about joining those, like I'm thinking, for instance, one that that we partner with Courage California, that includes like NARAL and a few other like organizations that span different rights, like different social justice issues come together to discuss like more so getting certain elected officials into office. There's also the California Victory Network, which we're also a part of, that focuses on pipelining progressive women and femme-identified candidates, you know, in office. And so we also focus, and our focus right now, of course, is reproductive health. Sorry, but yeah, so drop in my email and then.
We will be sharing resources in the follow-up email with that. Being very cognizant of time, just want to pass it to Serena to just close us out as we hit 3 o'clock.
Great. Thank you so much, Marisol. And thank you to Jessica, Onyemma, Nakia, and Laura. This was really an important conversation. So I just want to do 3 things in the 1 minute that I have here. One is to just say thank you again to all of our speakers, but also to all of you for showing up. That's the #1 thing that we can do. We had almost 250 people on this call at one point and more than 400 registered. So we know that this is a topic of interest to so many of you. We are a resource for you. Women's Foundation California has been investing in training and connecting community leaders around a range of issues that are all related to reproductive justice for almost 43 years. So I know that many of you, our funder colleagues, have been looking to us as a resource, and I want to say to you that we are here. We can point you in the right directions, and we can connect you to the people that you need to be connected to around these issues. The second thing is to what you've heard today is, you know, if you're taking anything away from this call, you know that we have incredible movement leaders. We need them to be focused on the work. And that means that we need to allow them to do their work without making it more difficult, without erecting more barriers. And we need to fund them so that they can add more staff, so that they can be responsive to the volunteer needs and other needs that are much more pressing for people who are coming to California to access abortions, or people who are already in California who can't access abortion easily. And so the third thing is to give to these organizations, particularly BIPOC-led RJ organizations, directly. And so we can tell you who those are in addition to the ones that are featured here today. If you can give directly, please do. You can also always, again, count on us as a resource. You can give to the Women's Foundation California, and we can ensure that the money will get out to the groups that need it. We have a trust-based, easy grant-making system. We take applications over the phone. We don't require reports. And we have just recently announced multi-year support. And this is, I just wanted to say that because I think that there was a question in the chat about what are we doing differently. And so we're stepping up. You heard the governor say it. You've heard us say it. We were made for this moment. We have the resources in terms of money, and most importantly, the people. And so we need to be supporting our movement leaders. And I hope that you will join us in doing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you, everyone.